Hello, everyone, and welcome to a very special episode of Blame It on Marketing, which I personally have been waiting to record since January of last year. We have a wonderful guest with us and a long time big fan of Blame It on Marketing and of anything I've worked at, Matthew Wahlrab with us. Actually, know Matthew from a job 6 years ago now, maybe? Is that right? Maybe more at PatSnap. So I worked for an IP SaaS company, intellectual property SaaS company, and Matthew was one of our content collaborators. And we've never met in person. He lives on the other side of the world, but we've kept in touch this whole time. And he came to be an extreme help and comfort and use for us when some IP drama went down, which is why we wanted to film this episode. So without further ado, Matthew, could you give us a little bit about yourself and some background into who you are and, how you came to be?
Matthew Wahlrab, founder of RapidAlpha. We're an innovation management advisory. We're very much focused on taking ideas and being able to bring them into market, oftentimes creating new markets. Because of this experience, I work a ton in intellectual property around ideas, intellectual property about creating brands, anything that can be done to create a competitive advantage, a moat, sustain competitive advantage over the long run.
One of the reasons, as Ruta has alluded to already, that we wanted to record this episode about intellectual property was because most of the time, marketers deal a lot with intellectual property. We talk about it all the time. We talk about IP until the cows come home because we handle content. But Ruta and I had a little run-in with some IP drama at some point in the creation of this podcast. We wanted to share that with you because it's a real-world example. And then with Matthew's help, we want to talk about some of the things that we should think about as marketers when it comes to IP. So Ruta, without further ado, I'm going to let you tell a bit of the story and I might fill in the blanks or be your hype man in the background just going, yeah. Over to you, tell the story, mate.
I'm going to get very riled up, everyone, so just bear that in mind. I'm telling this in a dramatic, as in what happened to me as a person as this was happening. So it was actually, I think, a month after we started posting Blame It on Marketing. So I think, if memory serves right, we started posting in December and this happened in January. So, we're brand new. We have like 12 views and I opened my LinkedIn one morning and I have a message from someone being like, oh, you stole my idea. Like, I've had it on my website for ages. Here is my version of literally Blame It on Marketing podcast with the same concept, because what other concept is it going to be, right? It's not exactly hard to figure out what kind of podcast you would make. And she's like, take down your stuff. And I was like, whoa, like what? What do you mean? And this person is in the US and they're claiming that they've trademarked the name. And I was like, okay, whoa. Let me get some of my investigation chops out. I know how trademarks work. I know how to go onto the USCPO and search for stuff. Let's see what you got. So I go on and lo and behold, she's got nothing. So I'm like, not worried about it. I think at that point I messaged Matthew anyway and I'm like, hey, this thing's going on, but like, nothing's really happened. Like, she doesn't have any like legal right. And I think Matthew was like, don't worry about it for now, just see what happens. But obviously I'm ranting to Emma on the phone like, what the fuck, and all of those things. But in all honest truth, I think at that point we would have had a conversation with her and I've been like, listen, should one of us just kind of tweak the name, or like, shall we make a joke out of it and both continue doing it? Like, it wasn't that big of a deal. I think it's just the fact that she went on such a aggressive, like, pro litigation and threat I guess angle that I wanted to be just as aggressive as her, but in reality I don't think that we would have minded very much, right, Emma? Am I recalling that correctly?
Yeah. I mean, like, we do content collaborations with people all the time and it would have been quite funny. Like, we would have gone on we would have done an episode together, or we would have, like you say, changed the name or even like made a joke out of it. I think because we'd only just started, and also the other person involved hadn't really started either. So yeah, I think
no, she had posted.
Yeah,
she'd posted later than us, like the first episode. She even needed to add an underscore into her URL for stuff because we had the names. But anywho, so we kind of just left it. And then a couple of weeks later, I receive another LinkedIn message from somebody that has only me and Emma as connections, called Karen Adams. Hilarious, can't make this shit up. Again, being like, our lawyers are watching you. And I was just like, dude, like, when nobody's literally like, this is all very dramatic. But I go back onto the USCPO, by the way, which is where you check for patents and trademarks filed in the US. And I can see that that person has filed for the Blame It on Marketing trademark for podcast production. And I'm like, okay, shit, it's now serious. And that's where we go back to Matthew and we're like, okay, what do we do? Like, I've been collecting evidence of when we posted and what she said, and what dates and times, and like scraping the web for other mentions of it and all of that stuff. So I've got my evidence ready, and I think I've got a pretty good first dibs case. But again, luckily, it takes forever and a day to get your trademarks approved in the US. So from then on, so this is like January, we're basically just getting on with our lives. And it's not until about, I want to say, was it July, that we picked the subject back up. This person hasn't threatened us or anything in that time. I kind of just went back to her and said, hey, once you get your trademark approved, please come back to us. Until then, there's nothing that you can enforce upon us, right? I'm going to pause here, and just let anyone interject, and maybe Matthew, just rate our reactions up until this point of the drama.
There was so much more that actually was going on. Like, that is the Cliff Notes version. Because as we're going through this, right, and got the first message from my standpoint on the IP side, it is often very scary to go through. And while the volume, right, of podcasts that had been published, right, wasn't necessarily very high, there was a lot of work that was being done, right, in the background to present a professional front, right, for the podcast. And here we have, right, this letter. We often refer to them as angry letters. Sometimes they come from lawyers, sometimes they come from individuals. And one of the things that no one really wants to be on the wrong side, right, of a story, to clearly be doing wrong to someone else. And one of the major things, like, I know, Ruta, you did a bunch of research. I probably did just as much as I was going through to say, how credible is this? Does this meet the standards, right, of trademark? Is this something that had been abandoned? And I distinctly remember how challenging it was to find anything around Blame It On Marketing other than a handful of things that had been published by others who were not her. So, and it was just a handful of phrases. And then I think there was a whole thought process that went into how serious do we take this, and what is the next reasonable step, especially to manage costs. And I think there's a lot that happened in between each of these conversations as things escalated, where there were choices to say, how much money do we want to spend on this? How challenging do we want to make the other person's life? And then what do you, as the podcasters, want to do to potentially look at trademarking, right, your own case, and running an interference, right, on this other trademark to kill it before it even gets issued. So all of that was happening in the background. Yeah. And then for those that don't know, USPTO's United States Patent and Trademark Office, in case they want to look it up.
You want to look it up?
Sorry, Emma.
I was gonna say, I think you make a really good point, Matthew, because there was all these things going on, and there's this sort of like risk analysis going on. Like, even so for Ruta and I, like, we just started the podcast. We loved it because it was almost like, to begin with, it was a hobby, and it was like it's this cathartic outlet for Ruta and I. And at that point, we're like, we're not sure how serious we are about this thing, even though we love it. You just don't know. But it's so easy to see how something that starts out as something that's like a hobby or something that you enjoy soon becomes this really entangled mess that we could have ended up being sued. I mean, I'm no spoiler alert. We obviously didn't, because we're doing this podcast still. But that could have been the outcome, right? It could have got really, really messy. It could have got very threatening, because I think Ruta and I were both getting the LinkedIn messages, and I think one of the things that I thought was very strange was the sort of, like you say, Matthew, the angry letter, the like how angry and aggressive the messages were. It's the first time I've had anything like that in one of my inboxes.
Yeah.
So
And
very odd.
bear in mind also it's probably also because like British people aren't litigious like that, and that's not something that we're used to dealing with, I guess, on a day-to-day basis. Even in businesses, so not like personal one-to-one, but even in businesses, like the most trademark exposure I've had is like when I asked someone to stop using our name in their ads because our name is trademarked, so you can't use it. Like that's as deep as it gets, and I got the response of like, oh my god, so sorry, I didn't know, kind of thing, we'll get it amended. So neither of us were like prepped or ready for any kind of like anger or like drama when it came to that.
That's fascinating because my experience is totally different.
America.
Yes. Yes. And it's not just in the United States. We have plenty of cases in Europe, but I think that's a nature of the business. And from my standpoint, I like to put myself in both people's shoes. I could fully imagine and appreciate if this other individual had a Blame It On Marketing podcast, right? Had a handful of episodes, but if during this process there was this other party had demonstrated an interest in actually keeping right momentum, doing additional podcasts, doing additional publishings and publications, is like, okay, this person really right is invested in this, right, in much the same way. So then, what can we do? And oftentimes we see that people start off aggressive because that's all it takes to get someone to cease and desist. So you can start off aggressive, but it's really it's a choice. I really prefer to see get an understanding of both parties and let that right determine tactics. But there were so many clues right along the way that it just seemed like this, from my standpoint, was a person that felt aggrieved, had an idea, had abandoned the idea, right, and was upset, right, that someone else, right, was moving it forward. Yet nonetheless, other than attempting to register for a trademark, wasn't really taking active and concrete steps, right, to revive something that they had abandoned and had never attempted to reserve rights for.
Yeah. It's if you start a project, and for example, I think a lot of this, I think, again, you're right, Matthew, very wise. I think she probably felt disappointed in herself that she hadn't managed to get the project off the ground. So the aggression was actually her own disappointment in herself. And maybe she wasn't annoyed at Ruta and I at all. And actually she was just like acting out of, sheer disappointment that it hadn't actually worked out for her. Doesn't make it any less threatening when it's in your inbox, but it certainly does offer up maybe a better answer. Maybe not everyone's an asshole.
And we definitely took some, not drastic actions, but we like to call them petty actions, whilst this was happening.
Maybe I didn't get any emails on this.
No, you didn't, Matthew.
Oh man,
there's nothing illegal.
You did what?
Wait, what
absolutely.
did you get me into?
We sent some unpleasant things to somebody's house. No, I'm kidding. We took some. What would we call them?
I think we acted like the marketers we are, right? So it's almost a little bit like we're in competition now. You've thrown down the gauntlet. You've made this competition. Ruta and I are fierce. We're like, let's do it. So then I think that was the motivation behind starting to do, as Ruta dubs them, the petty actions. But they were all how can we basically branch out and get as much digital real estate, that's how I always think of it, as possible. So how can we snap that up as quickly as we can and kind of be one step ahead of it, so that should a claim come back, we've almost kind of got it all. Like we've put the hotels down on all of the streets, you know what I mean? Good luck.
And when you Google Blame It On Marketing, it's us. It's that's what the world is now, and it is now. So I'm very happy about that. So if you're wondering what those actions look like, so we snapped up all of the social media handles we could that were blame it on marketing, or as close to blame it on marketing that we could. So on LinkedIn, on TikTok, on YouTube, on Twitter. We don't even use Twitter, but we were like, F it, let's grab it whilst we can. And then the big thing for us was, so we bought the blameitonmarketing.com domain, which was about, I think, £500 at that point. And neither of us were planning to do that, but we were like, okay, we don't want to wait for someone else to buy it, especially that person, if they were going to spend money on applying for trademarks, maybe they want to spend money on getting the domain name. So we bought the domain name in a rush one morning. And then we eventually ended up filing for a trademark in the UK on top of that as well. But let's not get into that quite yet. So Matthew, in terms of our actions for kind of shoring up the digital space, what are your thoughts on that? And maybe you have some other stories of things like that happening, outside of
Yes.
blame it on marketing that you can draw from.
Absolutely. There's so much there. And from a IP standpoint, everything that you're working on doing, right, is demonstrating an intent, and the scope and the viewers is to establish, right, the brand and associate the brand, right, with the individuals behind the brand. So the things that you talk about, social media, blocking that, right, from other people getting access. And so granting other people the opportunity to take that handle and start doing posting and creating brand confusion. You don't want that to happen. Going through, grabbing the URL. This is one of my favorite stories. So a mining operator, one of the largest mining companies, split out a subsidiary called South 32. And when they did this and picked the name, they didn't register the domain name, south32.com. So someone that absolutely holds a monster grudge against South 32 registered South 32. And so if you go to south32.com right now, you see one of the most inflammatory web pages you're ever going to see about how terrible South 32 is. But if you go to south32.net, you're going to get a wonderful South 32 experience.
Oh, not a .net. Oh,
They had
no
choice.
Come on, guys.
They had no choice.
Yes.
Fair, but
like
.net is rough.
Very much so, especially for a company, right, that generates $1 billion a year. You don't have, right, the .com. That's a challenge. So this principle of being able to establish your brand, eliminating confusion around the brand, all the actions that you took. You call it petty, but if you are getting advice during the time, that's absolutely the advice. You're in a foot race against someone else where there might be some confusion about who owns that. If you can ever get to a point where you imagine doing a poll and a survey to say, hey, for this, what do you think of, right, when you see these things? The World Wildlife Fund, and so WWF, and then in the United States we have WWF Wrestling. They registered the trademark right in the United States. The World Wildlife Fund registered everywhere else. Didn't think it was going to be a problem. The World Wildlife Fund is like, hey, wait a second. You're using our trademark. And they're like, yeah, but everybody in the United States, knows and understands. It's like, yeah, but we're international and we have billions of people, right, that recognize our trademark. And that was a big part, right, of what allowed the World Wildlife Fund to win in court. And so the
Is
steps
that why
that
they changed it to WWE?
That is why they changed. Yeah.
Oh, I had no idea. I used to like wrestling when I was small.
Me too. But I was like, we all knew that at the time, that's why they had to do it. And it was like this, I guess that's the first time probably for a lot of people that was so public. I mean, there are obviously, as you say, Matthew, there are other really public ones, but that was global because it impacted the WWFE, whatever, the wrestling, because we all loved it, didn't we?
So obviously we were doing those things to kind of shore up, but also to make the person who's trademarking life more difficult if they did want to go ahead and really double down on blame it on marketing. in terms of a legal standpoint, so if it did come to a point where we had to contest the trademark, how would that have played? Because I kind of assume it would have maybe helped us a little bit, but would that have actually had a significant impact on us trying to counter the trademark?
Yeah, so some of the things that could have been done, right? And I know we had some of these conversations is when we became aware, right, that a trademark had been filed, you can file an interference proceeding. And the earlier you do this in the process to present evidence to show, hey, this trademark has been used right elsewhere, this person shouldn't be entitled to it, and then we're actually using this and we haven't abandoned the trademark. It looks like this person did. We're registering our own trademark. It really depends on how much capital you have, how serious you think this other person is, and how serious you think their case is. And I think we got to a point as we were going through looking at the evidence that you had collected, Ruta, and the things that I was finding, and it really seemed like an open shut case for the United States Patent and Trademark Office to be able to look at this submission and say, they should have been able to find right on their own without any third party support that this isn't there. Now, if the case was going to get more serious or we had indications that, okay, she's posting podcasts or she has some newsletters, she's using all this branding, she's taking active steps, the more this other party was, if she had been demonstrating right use, then it makes sense to say, okay, well, we can spend, maybe $1,000, inoculate ourselves right from this by attempting to throw a hand grenade at her while she's registering her trademark. And then we can go through, because it was a question for a long time whether or not you wanted to actually register a trademark, because you
Mm.
can drop a
Yeah,
trademark
because it was
name.
it was such early days, we didn't know what we wanted to do. But again, thankfully, because it takes so long to get it took, I think, 9 months for the first examination to happen. So just to explain, once you apply for a trademark, they can accept the application, but in the US it took 9 months for an actual person who has any power to look at it, to then say like, oh, this might be valid or might not be valid. So we had a long time, and obviously we were producing the podcast during that entire time whilst the other person wasn't. So I feel like once we got to that area, I kind of wasn't that worried anymore. Saying that, we still got a trademark in the UK, so I guess we were worried. Yeah.
If things do escalate, right, and you go and you take a look, right, and there's some claim that's being brought against you, and you're looking at how to resolve this matter, all of the work that had been done to be able to build up the brand was creating appreciation for blame it on marketing, right, bringing awareness to this. So in a counterclaim, if for whatever reason ownership had resided with this other party, right, there is the ability to take all the work that had been done to build up this brand, as painful as it would have been. It could have been used to bring down any legal liability that you might have had and just transfer over the rights, right, and that brand value, as opposed to losing everything, right, and still having to pay a bill for just wanting to support people with the world's greatest marketing podcast.
We haven't paid him to say that, just to be clear.
We're saving money left and
think,
right and blame it on marketing.
I think one of the reasons we wanted, again, just to go back to why we wanted to share this story, is obviously it's fun to discuss, the drama that we had and for everyone to hear our little tale of woe. But I think it does come back to a wider point, which for marketers, because I think a lot of us don't necessarily pay much attention in the same way that we've had conversations where we've talked about GDPR and those sorts of things. I think, and the personal data we hold as marketers, I think this is sort of like that other, I don't want to call it like the other ugly stepsister, but it kind of feels like that, doesn't it? Which we're all kind of aware of. We're like, we know about trademark infringement, we know about copyright, we know about IP, we know about patents, but we don't ever, I think as marketers, we kind of go, oh, I kind of know this stuff, but maybe if I don't pay too much attention, it's wishy-washy, it's kind of all fine. And obviously that, as we are trying to demonstrate, that can obviously land you in some hot water. So Matthew, I'm really interested from your perspective, like what are some of the basic things that you think as marketers we should know about this stuff to kind of not just protect our organizations, but also protect our own intellectual property when we're putting stuff out there?
Yeah, some of the challenges really come down to understanding what are the right instruments in terms of intellectual property. So much of the work that is done by marketing contributes significantly to the value of the business. You imagine, right, an enterprise, right, like Coca-Cola, being unable, right, to use their name. They have their bottles for a long time, right? Their bottles, unique design. I think they had even filed design patents for it. So for the ornamental features, right, of the bottle, you build so much brand value in marketing that almost everything that is public facing and internally facing actually becomes an asset for the business. And so you're generally looking at trademark and copyright, right, as the two core. But as you're building web pages and you have a product page, then you start finding yourself having to deal with utility patents that protect the actual product. So going through and actually having to say, hey, we have a product here. Do we have any patents on this product? If we actually publish the patent numbers that are associated with this product, that helps us give public notice so that others, if they're considering to steal our product or steal our ideas, we've at least publish, right, notice, and then being able to keep a record of these things. So many things, right, in intellectual property is hygiene, but unfortunately I feel like so much happens in marketing, right, at speed, and there's this big push, right, to do everything fast, fail fast, who cares, that it's so easy to find yourself walking into a buzzsaw. You're like, oh, we're going to do this and we're going to fail fast, and who cares about patents, who cares about this? There's your own rights, but then there's the rights of others. And when they collide, especially for some of the things that we see, people investing 3 years of their lives, millions of dollars into the products, they launch the product, and then they get a lawsuit. Oh, well, that stinks. We don't have enough money to pivot. So what do we do? It's like, well, you don't do anything. You're in bad shape, kid. Here's the legal bills, right, that you can have, right, to be able to do the assessment. But oftentimes it's just getting some basic training and then having somebody, right, that you can just float something by, like, hey, we don't really have any resources, or I'm a freelancer, there really isn't a legal department, in here. And then you have different things in terms of people with different perceptions, right, of risk. Having somebody that you can go to, especially throughout your career, right, is priceless, just to get, right, a sanity check. Did I think of everything? There's a ton there. I could
Get
rant on
yourself a
this stuff for
trademark
like
friend,
3
an
hours.
IP friend.
Yeah, for sure. And they'll be
Yeah.
so happy to talk to you. It's like, oh my gosh, like marketing is like the cool kid, and we're just a little IP, the younger siblings. Hey guys, our stuff's important too. Hey, can we contribute to the webpage? IP people most people really want to help, but sometimes we can't help ourselves in terms of the legal stuff, and so it can be like an eye roller for people in marketing. It's like, God, this is never going to happen. You're
Have you?
crazy.
Yeah, it's interesting you bring that up. So again, in my career, because of I've worked in software, a lot of the times we just don't deal with a lot of IP that needs protecting, or that people think needs protecting, so we can just go do whatever we like. But I know that there's like a running meme online where like, oh, marketing trying to get the new campaign by legal, and it's like the opposite problem, right, of where marketing is trying to get their stuff through. Have you ever seen that occur? So where maybe the IP team or the legal team with the IP team are really blocking productivity? How do you kind of tackle that as well? I guess it's knowing your stuff as a marketer, right? But you can't out lawyer a lawyer, probably.
No, you definitely can't. And it's interesting because different organizations, people will have final say, right? And oftentimes you have to getting past legal. It's understanding when they have a like actual case law right behind them and the reasoning behind what they're doing. Like, here this is potentially right what could happen. It's like a lot of the analysis that was done in the very beginning of this, like, how serious is this? Does someone actually own this trademark? Is it actively in use? And we're going through all these like boxes, right, and we're unable to check anything, right, that would say, okay, this is real serious, like, let it either go away or let it escalate. And so for legal, oftentimes so much of everything in business is just being able to persuade. Put yourself in the legal person's shoes, explain what it is that you're attempting to accomplish. This is what I'm attempting to accomplish. How do you recommend I do these things? Here's the mandate that I have. This is what I've attempted to do. How do you suggest, right, I prepare this to make sure we don't, we're not doing anything to the detriment, right, of the business. Usually that type of structure in a discussion can do a lot to bring the temperature down.
Sage advice. That's it. It's that whole thing where I think I don't know if it's because we're way cooler. I think it's because we're just trying to get away with murder most of the time, to be honest. Because like Ruta says, like a lot of the time, especially when you work in SaaS and you're a startup, we're not worried about giving away our IP in some places, especially if, lots of us do demand generation. We're all about giving everything away, being as helpful as possible, letting you see as much of the product as you possibly need, because that's really, really helpful to our audiences. But I guess when we are doing that, we are opening ourselves up to trouble. And then you do see, I mean, I personally think they're quite petty, that, that your competitors that do things like create ads that are targeting your brand name, being like, why we're better than blah, blah, blah. And we're just like, oh, that's so pathetic. But that happens a lot.
Or even worse, having like pages on their website.
All the pages.
Yeah. Like, why we're better than blah, blah.
There's a couple of things. I mean, I've seen it right in my business, and you talk about petty. Like I'll go on, right? Like, oh, okay, they did this right with our name, great. Like, I'm just gonna click it, refresh it, toss on the VPN, and let's help them spend a couple of bucks, right? With no.
I love that.
Right. So there's that. One of the areas where I see marketers shoot the business in the foot is, contrary to popular belief, there's tons of patents on software. There's tons of rights on software. And even when people are doing development, right, using, open source, there's still licensing agreements. And what happens when marketers go through and they say like, oh, here's our process and this is how our software works, you get somebody like me who people do not let out in public, right, for a reason. I'm like, definitely belong right in a cubicle in the back of the office. I'm scouring that webpage, right? On one screen. On the other screen, I have a patent. And I am mapping one-to-one all of the elements of my client's patent to their marketing materials, right? Demonstrating infringement. And just like, thank you, marketing. And then it's fascinating because I get to go through every once in a while. I get to send a nasty letter like, hey guys, here you go. And I saw you just raise some capital, so I know you can pay the bill. And then what does marketing do? The next thing, they go through and they take down that webpage. And then I laugh because I've registered that webpage on waybackmachine.org, so I can always get it there. And I have a PDF copy, right, sitting on my SharePoint in a backup hard drive. I'm ready to party. What a lot of people don't realize is there's just psychos out there like me that take this stuff very, very, very seriously. And we've done it enough to understand what people are going to try to do to circumvent, right, these pain points. So, can be serious.
Up until this moment, I've never been scared of Matthew. I'm fucking terrified right now.
One of the most common things that I hear is like, oh my God, I'm so glad you're on our side of the table, because you talk about petty in wanting to win. I have to win. Absolutely have to. Yeah.
So how would we go about doing that well as marketers then? How do we not, play into somebody looking at our page and looking for infringement?
Absolutely. One of the superpowers that marketing has is when you are focused on what is it that we need to accomplish right with this page, being able to get after it. One of the challenges in the process is oftentimes you're working with SMEs. SMEs, when you ask them like, well, what's going on in the product? What are the benefits? To them, it's often very technical, when most people don't care how you're doing stuff, they care a lot more about the results. So if you go through and you're able to focus on, well, what am I attempting to do here as a marketer? I want to demonstrate right results. I want to demonstrate credibility. These are all areas where you don't have to go into the nitty gritty necessarily of process and just use some of the basics that I know you guys have covered right in your other podcasts, right? Testimonials for credibility, being able to show actual numbers, screenshots, right? Other intellectual property, UI, wire design, if it's SaaS or some type of B2B solution. Be focused on the intent. What is it that you're attempting to accomplish? And how much do you actually need to say at the point in time where this individual is in the sales funnel? What should be publicly facing? What's better off right in a presentation? And what are these things that are better off never said at all?
Mm. You know what? That's great advice for founders, because I can see founders wanting to get into the nitty gritty of their baby, and show it all off. And maybe we should be the people being like, it's a bit risky. Let's not do that.
Yes, because what can happen, and anytime you guys want, yeah, I'm happy to show you. We call it a claim chart. So you take the patent claim and you take the person's webpage. At one point in my career, I was generating 1,000 of these a year to hit people over the head, right, and get licensing fees. And it's like, awesome, thanks, marketing. You guys are the best. Oh my gosh, they published a white paper. Awesome. This is going to go really fast for me. Boom. And then now we've actually developed tools to make that process go even faster. Like things, it's when millions to hundreds of millions of dollars right are on the line, and you can spend a small fraction, like 50,000 bucks to potentially get 50 million, right, in damages, and injure and distract right the other party right with a lawsuit. That's a fantastic ROI. Let's do that. And so people do.
I'm sort of speechless.
Emma, your face is in shock. Yeah.
I've got even more stuff.
I know it exists. I can imagine it, and I would absolutely want Matthew on my side. I would always be in my head. I'd be like, if I was doing something like this, I'd be like, okay, can you just check that I'm not like I don't owe anyone any money here before I do this thing? No one ever does that. No one, unless you've maybe been through it, like we said before.
Yeah, it's an entire process called freedom to operate. It's well known right in the IP industry. Hey, I'm going through this. I'm interested right in freedom to operate. I want to make sure I'm not stepping on anybody's trademarks. Here's the jurisdictions right that we're operating in. Here's the product right that we're advertising. Let's take a look at this. And nowadays, I mean, there's tools, and it's fantastic because I think some of the things that took me a decade to get pretty good at, the crux of what I do and what I've had to learn, right? There's tools where you can just take your copy, run it through something like a partner that we have is called IP Screener. You just take your text from your webpage, drop it into this field box, and then hit run search, and it's going to give you 25 patents. And you can work with a technical person right on your team, like, hey, does this look or sound like anything that we have right on this page? And it's like, okay, if it does, then you could decide right to escalate or build in some type of process. But there's so many things that can be done to reduce the cost right of FTO. And then you look at skill sets and things to be able to put on your resume. If I have to choose right between two individuals right that are contractors and freelancers, and someone actually has some expertise right and is going to be checking off like, hey, I have some experience with FTO. I have at least this process that I'm running. That's a premium service and something that most people will want to pay more for. And then I know there's an opportunity to talk about like freelancers and the IP that they're generating. Some of these contracts, people are signing off, and there's a little paragraph in there saying, hey, anything that I give to you, I've gone through and I've validated that no one else has rights to this. And if I am aware of somebody owning rights to it, I'm taking steps to get you those rights. And you're basically taking on all the liability, which isn't a whole lot of fun if you're making 500 bucks, right, for some copy that you're writing.
It's funny that you mentioned freedom to operate, because I know what that is from working in an IP company, but also we actually did a freedom to operate on Blame It Marketing before we registered and started using the name. So if anyone's wondering what that practically looks like, it's just doing a little bit of internet scouring to check if anyone else is using the name, if it's registered anywhere, if it's trademarked in this case for us. So check your local geographies that you care about, and it's all quite easily accessible via the internet now. It's not a mystery by any means. So yeah, and that's how I knew that we were first, which is comforting. But yeah, the IP side of things for contractors is really interesting, because there's your version where you take on all the liability of infringing upon someone, but there's the other version where basically a company is like, anything that you create for us, anything that you create for us, even on like a meta level of like the way you do something is owned by us as far as we're concerned, and we're paying for you, which is a hard line, right? Because like I know at RapidAlpha you guys have very specific ways of finding innovations, taking them to market. So I can imagine someone trying to say to you like, oh, this process you do with us, you did it with us internally, it's ours now, you can't do it with other people. Obviously you guys would be like, fuck off, like that's not how it works. And we've protected ourselves from that, but that is a reality also, right? Which is almost like modern slavery in a way, because you're preventing the person from working with other people using the thing that they invented.
Yeah, and it's as a contractor going in, right, and supporting our freelance services, these clauses, it's not just that they have the ability to own, right, and implement your processes, but those contracts give them the right to find somebody that does your work, right, for less money, give them all of your tools, empower them with your tools, they have transferred it over, and there is no license, right, that needs to be paid. And a lot of this, right, is done under the auspices of like, well, this is our boilerplate and I can't get it past legal. And people have to make a business decision, personal decision to say, well, no, this is not common practice. This is insane. You guys aren't in the business. You don't need access, right, to my process. The actual only thing you're paying me for is this work product. And structuring the contract for that. Yeah, but it's like most people don't have the experience to do that. And if you're going through and maybe you haven't had a project in a couple of weeks or a month, and someone goes through like, great, I'm gonna be able to pay all my bills on this, and then now you get this, 27-page, contractor work for hire, and all of these things have very, special meanings in there. If you don't have the ability to go through, right, and redline with confidence, to say, yeah, I get that this is your boilerplate, but I think you're giving me a contract that works for some of your other business functions. This is not really relevant for what we're doing. And then getting comfortable, not only just redlining those contracts, but start realizing the intellectual property that you have and you're delivering. If you own rights, there's a section in these contracts called background IP. You can list your background IP and you can exempt that from transfer. Little stuff, right, that goes a long way. And if you go back to their legal department or like, hey, I'm advocating, right, for this marketing shop, I'm going back to my legal, and hey, these marketers say that they have a ton of background IP, they've listed it out, they want to add this to an addendum, and they want to exempt this, right, from the contract. It's like, oh shit, who are these guys? uh, oh, this just got serious real fast, holy crap. All right, well, let's take a look at it. Yeah, it's great.
But it's so valuable, and it's something that none of us would ever think to do. And this has bitten me in the arse, I won't lie, because I came up with a community advocacy methodology, as you may well know. And then people have kind of used it and palmed it off as their own. Like, and that's, in a way, it's been great, because I'm like, I love seeing that. I love seeing that out in the open and that people are using it, but also, it's really bloody obvious that it's come from that methodology. And it's kind of like, it's kind of one of those things where I'm like, oh, I don't know whether I could have ever made any money from that. But had I known all of this stuff before, I could have done that. I could have protected it. I could have, all of those things. Shoulda, woulda, coulda. I'm not saying I now won't, though, for everybody who's listening who's decided to use it.
And that is important too. Posture and behavior, how you, one of the things that we see, like in patent space, for example, if you own patents and you sit on them and your patents are 10 years old, right? The technology is still being used or it's just getting in vogue, but you've never taken any steps to litigate somebody, someone's factoring that in on whether or not they want to infringe your patents. So the posturing, like one of the things that happens if you get served a notice, right, and you're the first person that this other counterparty has ever sued, you don't want to cave because someone's going to publish a press release saying like, hey, we got money right out of this individual. Then everybody else that has patents is like, well, if we're going to sue the really, really big guys, we have to build a war chest first, and we can get it from these little guys that just settle. Not great.
Absolutely.
So yeah, there's a lot there.
There's a lot of it's politics, right? In a way, like it's just legal politics of who's going to most likely do what, how can we, bully or push or distract. It's not just, oh, you're using our thing, stop using our thing, or you're using our thing. There's other incentives.
I think there's two things around this real quick. Like on one hand, you almost want to act like you're always preparing for court, and you want to have a very easy narrative, right? That a set of jurors are like, all right, people are throwing around these crazy words that, I've never heard of, estoppel, latches, like all of this stuff. I don't get any of it, but this is what I know. On a timeline, these individuals got there first, actively grew their brand, got a big following. They showed me some numbers. And then somewhere in here, after abandoning the trademark, this person came back in and gave somebody a nasty letter. I understand this now. Who do I perceive as being wrong in here? Being like taking those steps, the steps that you took even, and to say, okay, well, what can we know about Ruta and the caliber of her character? Before she even got started, she wanted it a freedom to operate. She respects people's rights so much. So you could tell she truly believes that if this was someone else's trademark, she wouldn't have used it. And having gone through all this and found all of this information, she took this extraordinary step, and then here's everything else that she did. Is this a bad person? No, I like this person. I like what they did. I wouldn't have thought of that. We need to give this person, right, extra credit. These are actual things, right, that goes through people's minds, right, in court. And having a fantastic, beyond reproach approach to your intellectual property is awesome. And I know on the advocacy stuff, just being able to go through, right, do the copyright at the bottom, taking that stuff seriously, doing the trademark, at least putting a TM on those things. I know I've received my presentations that I've given, right, to other people sent to me with other people's branding as marketing collateral. What? Where did this come from? What? These are work samples. Like, what the heck?
I've seen these before.
No way. There's no way. There's no way. So yeah, it happens, and that's a cost of doing high quality, high caliber work, that these things exist out there. And when they arise, being in a position to have a boilerplate, right, nasty letter, right, that you can send out, like, hey, I'm aware of this, and knock this crap off.
Stop it.
Yeah.
Please. Yeah. Cease and desist.
Yeah.
Kindly.
It's terrible.
Oh, there was so much good advice in there, Matthew. I think it also goes without saying very quickly. I know we're kind of at time, and I don't want to make us run over at all, but very quickly, because we've got, it's wrong to have a CEO on the podcast and not ask them about their feelings towards marketing. So that would be how I would like to end this, if that's okay. So tell us, Matthew, for all the CEOs listening, your feelings about working with marketers.
This is fantastic, because I feel like the title is going to be the CEO that doesn't understand marketing at all is going to be the tag for this one. Marketing every year, right? My New Year's resolution is like, this is the year that I have to get good at marketing, because it's a superpower. It's an absolute superpower. And it's a challenge because as you go through, right, getting primary market evidence for anything that you're doing that's new in innovation, right, new products and services, marketing has such a huge role to play to be able to do testing, to validate that the things that you're building, you should actually be building. It's priceless. And, you know, in addition to doing things like freedom to operate, you can't run a successful business without a rockin' marketing team. And it's, I think, one of the struggles that most people have as a CEO when you're looking at the line item is the investment and just the pure uncertainty around marketing. And so I think because of that, a lot of times you can see some unrealistic expectations, right, being placed on marketing. And then the frustration, the displaced anger that comes about because you're like, hey, well, we did all this stuff right on SEO and we've been testing right this entire time. It takes time to actually do the testing, get a statistically significant amount of information to be able to say, we need to go all in, and now we're going to do some click optimization. It's a lot, but if there's one, and here's like the challenge. We've talked a little bit about technical people founding companies. That's fantastic for building product, but it's amongst the least important things that a business should be focused on in the very beginning. One of the most important things is absolutely building up the brand, the company, right? And finding product market fit. And if instead of focusing on technical development, technical people decide to get really, really good at marketing, really, really invest in marketing, the dollars that you spend on marketing as opposed to technical R&D will almost always go way further than the time spent on technical development.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining us, Matthew. For anyone who wants to talk to Matthew, you can find him on LinkedIn, but you can also find him in the Blame It on Marketing community because Matthew is in there. Ruta and I are going to frantically run now and check all of our copyright and trademark stuff. Stop using the community and advocacy model because I'm going to copyright it. And that's it for this week's episode. So thanks for joining us, Matthew.